So I never thought I'd find myself in a room full of strangers, holding a chef's knife like it was a live snake, sweating because I was about to slice into some poor innocent vegetable for the first time in years. But there I was, signing up for a knife skills workshop on a random Thursday evening, mostly because I figured it was about time I stopped pretending I could survive solely on takeout and instant noodles. The place was this tiny cooking school tucked into a quieter street of the city. It had that warm, cozy vibe you expect from a spot where people talk about heirloom tomatoes and the perfect sear on a steak. I was half expecting a group of super serious culinary school types with knives sharp enough to cut through the tension in the room. Instead, when I walked in, everyone looked about as lost as I felt. There were a few couples, some older guys who looked like they knew what they were doing, and a handful of people who, like me, were probably here to just not mess up dinner for once. Then there was the chef, the instructor. I'd read the short bio online, but that didn't prepare me for the guy standing at the front of the room. He was maybe in his mid-30s, with dark hair that had that effortlessly tousled look, and eyes that seemed to hold a kind of quiet confidence you just don't get from reading Instagram bios. Not to mention, he had this really calm, measured way of speaking, like he knew exactly what you were thinking, but wasn't going to call you out on it. His name was Marco. Right away, there was something about him that made the room feel a little warmer. Maybe it was how he smiled when he talked about knife safety, or the way he moved around the counter like the kitchen was his playground. When he asked everyone to introduce themselves, he made it feel like he genuinely cared about who we all were. Not just a teacher, but someone who wanted to connect. Honestly, I wasn't sure what to expect from the class. Was it going to be a serious culinary boot camp, or just a fun way to spend a couple of hours? Turns out it was a little bit of both. We started with the basics: how to hold the knife, the proper grip, the classic rock chop technique. I was trying so hard not to cut off a finger, and meanwhile, Marco circled the room, gently correcting grips, offering tips. And then, just when I was getting the hang of it, the moment happened. I was chopping a pile of carrots when Marco came up behind me. I barely noticed at first. Because he was so close, I could feel the warmth radiating off his body. Suddenly, I was hyper-aware of the slight pressure of his chest brushing against my back, the way his hands moved around mine to adjust my grip, guiding my fingers with surprising tenderness. It wasn't just about the knife anymore. It felt like he was pressing closer, closer than was necessary to teach. My heart raced, and I tried to focus on the carrot, the knife, the cutting board, but it was almost impossible. He didn't say a word, just leaned in, and I swear I could hear his breath mixing with mine. It was electric and confusing all at once. That was the moment I realized this workshop might teach me more than just how to slice vegetables safely. And honestly, I had no idea where it was going to go next. I didn't say anything at first. I mean, what do you say when a guy you barely know suddenly invades your personal space like that? My hands froze for a second, the knife hovering awkwardly over the carrot. I felt my face get hot, which probably made me even clumsier. Marco must have noticed because after a moment, he pulled back just enough to clear the knife from my grip and smiled. This really soft, almost shy smile. Not the confident, in-control smile he'd had when he first introduced himself, but something different, more real. "Try holding the knife like this," he said quietly, his fingers still brushing lightly over mine as he repositioned my hand. I swear, it was like electricity shot through my arm. I tried to focus on the lesson, but it was almost impossible when he was that close. There was this warmth that wasn't just from the room or the cooking. They were right there, wrapped around me, and it made the entire experience feel suddenly intimate. "Better?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Yeah," I managed to say, even though my voice cracked a little. "Okay. Maybe a lot." He pulled back then, stepping around me to check on the others, but I could still feel that little bubble of tension hanging around me. For the rest of the workshop, I kept sneaking glances at him when he wasn't looking. Every time our eyes met, he'd give me this small nod or a quick smile that made my stomach twist into knots. The class went on, learning how to julienne peppers, dice onions, and even break down a chicken breast. I won't lie, I was terrible compared to a couple of the other guys who clearly cooked professionally, but Marco was patient, always hovering nearby, fixing my grip, or showing me how to make a cleaner cut, always with that quiet intensity in his eyes. After the class ended, people started packing up, chatting about recipes and where to find the best local produce. I was about to slip out quietly when Marco approached me. "Hey," he said, hands in his pockets, the same easy smile I'd seen before. "You did really well for your first time. You're a quick learner." "Thanks," I said, trying not to sound like an awkward mess. "I don't usually say this," he continued, rubbing the back of his neck like he was a little nervous too. "But if you want, I'm teaching a more advanced class next month. Maybe you could join?" I almost laughed because, honestly, I wasn't sure if I was ready to spend any more time that close to him, but something about the invitation felt like an opening. Like maybe this wasn't just about cooking anymore. "Yeah, I'd like that," I said, surprising myself. He smiled wider, and just before turning to leave, he added, "Also, if you ever want to practice, there's a really good farmer's market on Saturdays. I go almost every weekend." And just like that, he was gone, blending into the crowd. I left the workshop with a weird mix of emotions. Part of me was pumped to actually improve my knife skills, but another part? That part was replaying every second he'd stood that close, every time his hand brushed mine. I had no idea if he even felt the same way, or if I was just reading into it too much. But I knew one thing. I wanted to see him again. The next Saturday, I found myself at the farmer's market, the one he'd mentioned. It was bustling, full of colorful stalls, and the smell of fresh bread and herbs in the air. I wandered around, trying to look casual, hoping I'd bump into Marco. After all, he said he went almost every weekend, and then there he was, leaning against a stall, chatting with the vendor, that same effortless charm radiating off him. When he caught sight of me, his face lit up with that smile. "Hey!" he said, waving me over. I walked up, my heart doing this ridiculous dance in my chest. "Hey! You weren't kidding. This place is great. Yeah, it's my happy place," he said. "Want to grab some ingredients and maybe cook something together? I can show you a few tricks." I hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Sure, I'm in." We wandered the market together, picking out fresh veggies, some herbs, and even a bottle of wine from a small stall that looked promising. The conversation flowed easily. He told me about growing up in a family where food was everything, about his work as a chef, and I shared my own embarrassing kitchen fails. By the time we got back to his apartment, a small but cozy place with a kitchen that looked like it belonged on a cooking show, I felt unnervingly comfortable. We put on some music, uncorked the wine, and started cooking. It was during the prep that it happened again. Marco came up behind me, this time while I was chopping garlic. He pressed in close, his breath warm on my neck, guiding my hands with his. But this time, I didn't freeze. I leaned into it. "Better grip?" he whispered. "Definitely," I said, turning my head just enough to catch his eyes. He smiled, that same mix of confidence and something softer, something vulnerable. And right there, in his kitchen, with the smell of garlic and wine around us, I realized this workshop was about way more than just knives. We cooked together for hours, really. I mean, we started with this simple pasta dish he wanted to show me, but somehow ended up improvising with whatever we could find in his fridge. Marco was funny too. Not that chef humor kind of funny, but the kind that made me laugh without even trying. There was this ease between us, like we'd known each other longer than a couple of hours, and every time our hands brushed or our eyes met, I felt this kind of quiet electricity buzzing between us. At one point, I was stirring the sauce on the stove when I heard him come up behind me again, that familiar warmth pressing into my back. He didn't say anything at first, just rested his chin on my shoulder and breathed in the smell of the garlic and tomatoes we'd just sautéed. I couldn't help but lean back into him, feeling this weird mix of comfort and excitement. "You're really getting the hang of this," he whispered, voice low and close. Then, like it just occurred to him, he added, "Also, you're a terrible liar." I laughed, turning my head enough to flash him a mock glare. "What?" "I'm not lying." "Sure you're not," he said, smirking. "You said you could cook before you came here, but it's pretty obvious you were bluffing." "Okay, guilty," I admitted, "but I'm trying." He shifted so we were standing side by side now, our arms brushing as we moved around the kitchen. The closeness felt easy, natural, and I found myself not wanting it to end. Marco cracked open another bottle of wine while I chopped some fresh basil, and we talked about everything: our favorite places to eat, bad dates, childhood memories. Somehow, cooking became just the backdrop for something a lot sweeter. Later, after we plated the pasta and sat down at his small kitchen table, things got quieter between us. The noise of the city outside seemed to fade, and I watched him as he took a bite, eyes closing a little in that way that meant something was really good. When he looked at me again, there was this softness in his gaze that made my heart twist. "So," he said, setting his fork down, "what made you sign up for the knife workshop in the first place? You don't strike me as the type who's into cooking classes." I shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Honestly, I just wanted to learn something new, and maybe not order pizza every night. Plus, I guess I was hoping to meet someone interesting." He raised an eyebrow, teasing. "And did you?" I smiled, feeling bold. "Yeah, I did." There was a beat of silence, then he leaned forward, and I could smell that faint hint of cologne mixed with the garlic lingering in the air. Me too. That night, after I left, I kept replaying everything. The way his hands felt on mine, the closeness in the kitchen, his voice low and warm. It felt like something had shifted, like this wasn't just a casual thing anymore. I wondered if he felt it too, or if I was reading way too much into it. Over the next week, we texted. Not just about cooking, though there was plenty of that, but about random things, like what music we were listening to, movies we loved, the weird quirks we hadn't shared with anyone else. It felt easy, like picking up a conversation with someone who just gets you. I was surprised at how quickly I found myself looking forward to every message, every little joke, every subtle hint of something more. Then came the day of the advanced knife skills class. I was nervous in a way I hadn't expected, partly because I actually wanted to impress Marco, and partly because I wasn't sure if I could handle being that close to him again without completely losing my cool. The class was smaller this time, and Marco was in his element, teaching with that calm authority, moving around the room like a conductor leading an orchestra. When he came up behind me to correct my grip, it felt different, more intentional. His hand lingered a little longer, fingers brushing mine as he adjusted my hold on the knife. "Better?" he asked, his breath warm against my ear. "Much better," I whispered back, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, that slow, knowing smile that made my chest tighten. "You're a natural." The class went by in a blur, but after it ended, Marco pulled me aside. There was this vulnerability in his eyes that caught me off guard, like he was about to say something important but wasn't sure how. "Can I be honest?" he asked. "Always," I said, heart pounding. "I've been wanting to ask you out properly," he admitted, cheeks coloring slightly. "Not just around knives and cooking." I grinned, feeling this rush of relief and happiness. "I was hoping you would." He laughed, and suddenly the kitchen felt like the most natural place in the world to take a chance. I didn't know exactly where this would go, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. That moment, him admitting it, me grinning like a complete idiot, felt like the start of something I hadn't even realized I was waiting for. We stood there, the late afternoon light slanting through the kitchen windows, and for a second, everything else just faded. I could still feel the heat from where his hand had brushed mine on the knife handle, the warmth of his breath near my ear. It was like a quiet promise, unspoken but electric. "Want to grab dinner sometime? No knives involved. Unless you want to wield one," Marco joked, his usual effortless charm back in full swing. I laughed and nodded. Definitely no knives, at least not on the first proper date. He smiled, that slow, easy smile that made my insides do a little flip. "It's a date then." After that, things started to fall into place in a way I hadn't really expected. We texted more often, but now it was less about cooking and more about everything else, the little details that make someone feel, well, like someone you want to know better. I found myself saving dumb memes to send him, sharing music tracks that I thought he'd like, and getting little goodnight texts that made me smile more than I wanted to admit. Our first real date was low-key but perfect. He picked me up from my place, looking impossibly handsome, in this casual black jacket that somehow made him seem both approachable and magnetic. We went to this little tapas bar he recommended, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The kind of place with dim lighting, handwritten menus, and those tiny plates meant for sharing. We ordered a bunch of dishes, sampling everything while talking about anything and everything. Work frustrations, family quirks, childhood memories. I caught myself stealing glances at him, watching the way his eyes lit up when he talked about the things he loved, how his smile softened when he laughed. At one point, he reached across the table and brushed a stray hair from my forehead. I swear, my heart just about stopped. "Sorry," he said, voice low. "I didn't mean to get all sappy." I shook my head, trying to play it cool but failing miserably. "No, don't apologize. I like it." There was this brief moment where the world seemed to hold its breath. Then he leaned in just a little, and I caught that scent again, the faint hint of cologne mixed with something warm and familiar. Our eyes met, and I think we both knew what was coming next. But just before our lips touched, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face, but then he smiled and put the phone away without answering. "Sorry about that," he said, a little embarrassed. "Work stuff. Can't escape it." I nodded, understanding more than I let on. "It's okay. We can pick up where we left off." That night, when he walked me to my door, I felt that same nervous excitement swirling in my chest. We stood there for a moment, neither of us quite making the first move, and then finally he leaned in and kissed me. It was soft, tentative at first, but it quickly deepened into something warm and electric, like every nerve ending suddenly came alive. When we pulled apart, he looked at me with those dark eyes full of something almost shy. "So, can I see you again?" I smiled, feeling that same boldness I'd felt back in the kitchen. "Definitely." After that, our time together became this mix of quiet moments and sparks. We cooked together more often, sometimes sharing recipes, sometimes just improvising and laughing when things didn't go as planned. One night, we stayed up until 3 a.m., trying to bake bread from scratch. It was a disaster, but Marco kept smiling, saying it was all part of the process. We started exploring the city together too, finding little cafes, wandering through bookstores, stealing kisses in hidden courtyards. With every step, I felt more certain that what was happening between us was something real, something worth holding on to. One afternoon, a couple of weeks later, we found ourselves back at the market where we'd first bumped into each other. The sun was shining, the air filled with the scent of fresh herbs and ripe fruit. Marco looked at me with that familiar smile. "You know," he said, "I was thinking, maybe we should open a little pop-up sometime. Just us, cooking for friends, testing out recipes, no pressure, no big deal." I laughed, but underneath that was a genuine excitement. "That sounds amazing." He reached out, taking my hand in his, fingers intertwining. "I want to see where this goes with you, not just in the kitchen." I squeezed his hand, heart pounding. "Me too, Marco, me too." Nothing about this felt rushed or forced. It was all this gradual, beautiful buildup, the kind you don't realize you're waiting for until it's right in front of you. We were carving out our own little world, one cut, one meal, one touch at a time. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. After we made that decision to try the pop-up idea, it felt like something shifted between us, like we were no longer just two guys casually seeing each other, but partners in this little adventure. We started planning the whole thing, brainstorming menus, figuring out logistics, and mostly just bouncing ideas around over late-night texts that turned into morning conversations. It was exciting and terrifying all at once. One Saturday, we met up early at the market to pick out ingredients for a trial run. The usual buzz of vendors and customers was there, but this time everything felt different. I was no longer just a guy fumbling through cooking classes. I was part of this plan, part of something that felt bigger and more real. Marco walked beside me, his hand casually brushing mine as we moved through the stalls. The warmth of his touch grounded me, made every moment feel sharper, more alive. We stopped at a stall selling fresh herbs, and Marco picked up a bundle of rosemary. He held it out to me, eyes shining. "For the lamb, if we decide to do it." "I like where you're going with that," I said, smiling back. Rosemary's a great call. We spent the next hour gathering everything we thought we'd need: fresh vegetables, artisanal cheeses, crusty bread. I was surprised at how natural this felt, how easy it was to work alongside him, like we'd been doing this together for years. Between selecting cherry tomatoes and debating over which olive oil to buy, there was this constant undercurrent of something sweet and unspoken. Back at Marco's apartment, we laid everything out on the kitchen counter and started cooking. We had no real plan, just a handful of ideas and enough ingredients to make a few different dishes. The kitchen filled with laughter, the scent of sizzling garlic and roasting vegetables, and that feeling that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. At one point, Marco caught me off guard by pulling me close from behind as I chopped onions. His breath tickled my ear as he murmured, "You're doing great." I froze for a second, then leaned back into him, feeling that familiar warmth spread through me. "Only because you keep distracting me," he laughed softly. "Maybe I'm just trying to keep you on your toes." Our hands tangled for a moment over the knife handle, and I could feel my pulse quicken. Cooking had turned into something more than just preparing food. It was this dance, this connection building between us one step at a time. After hours of cooking, we plated our little feast and sat down at the table, wine glasses clinking as we toasted to the first step of our pop-up idea. The conversation drifted from food to dreams, hopes, and even fears. "I've always wanted to open my own place," Marco admitted, swirling the wine in his glass. "But I was too scared. Too many what-ifs." "I get that," I said. "But maybe that's what makes this so exciting. We're not doing it alone." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. "Yeah, us." That night after I left, I lay in bed replaying everything. The laughter, the touches, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. It was like the kitchen wasn't just a place for cooking anymore. It was where we built something together, piece by piece. In the following weeks, we threw ourselves into the pop-up project. We found a small space willing to let us use their kitchen during off hours, created social media pages, and invited friends to come taste our food. The first night was nerve-wracking, but when people started arriving, tasting our dishes and telling us how much they loved them, all the nerves melted away. Marco and I worked side by side, the chemistry between us undeniable and growing stronger with every shared glance and touch. After the event, as we packed up, he caught my hand and pulled me close. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said, voice soft. "You're stuck with me now," I replied, smiling. He laughed and kissed me gently, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The more time we spent together, the deeper everything became. We weren't just cooking or planning pop-ups. We were building a life, filled with messy kitchens, late-night talks, stolen kisses, and the kind of comfort that comes from knowing someone's got your back. One evening, as we sat on his couch, tired but happy after a long day of prep, Marco looked at me and said, "You ever think about how weird it is? How a knife skills class led us here?" I chuckled, leaning into him. "Yeah, it's kinda crazy, but honestly, I'm glad it did." He smiled, fingers tracing lazy patterns on my arm. "Me too." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the warmth of the apartment and the promise of everything ahead, I realized this was just the beginning of our story. Some nights when everything was quiet and the city outside settled into its usual hum, Marco and I would find ourselves curled up on the couch, just talking. No screens, no distractions, just the sound of our voices and the occasional clink of the wine glass he always insisted on pouring just before we settled in. It was in those moments I started to see more of who he really was, peeling back the layers beyond the chef's confidence and the easy charm. One night, with the streetlights casting long shadows through the window, I asked him what made him fall in love with cooking in the first place. He shrugged, taking a slow sip of his red wine before answering. "It's silly, but my grandmother, she had this little kitchen in her house, all worn and cozy. I'd sit on the counter and watch her move, how she handled every ingredient like it was a secret she was about to share. Cooking wasn't just feeding people, it was her way of showing love." I nodded, picturing it, the smell of herbs, the warmth of that kitchen, the way he described it. "Sounds like she was pretty amazing." "She was," he said softly, "and I guess I've always wanted to honor that. To create something that feels that real, that honest." It struck me then how much cooking wasn't just a job or a hobby for Marco. It was a language, a way he communicated the things words sometimes couldn't. I reached over, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "You've got that in you. You make everything feel like it matters." He caught my hand in his, holding it there a little longer than usual. "And you? What about you? What's your story?" I hesitated, suddenly feeling the weight of all those years I'd spent avoiding kitchens, avoiding real connection. I guess I was scared. Scared of failing, scared of putting myself out there. Cooking was this thing that felt like it belonged to other people, you know? And then I showed up to your class, and everything shifted. He smiled, eyes warm and understanding. "You're braver than you think." That night, as we sat there in that quiet apartment, I realized just how much I wanted to keep building this with him. Not just the pop-up, not just the food, but everything. The laughter, the late-night talks, the moments stretched thin between nerves and hope. A few days later, Marco invited me to help with a private dinner he was catering for a small group of food bloggers. It was a big deal for him, and honestly, I was nervous. Not only because I wanted to impress, but because this was the first time someone outside our little bubble would see us working as a team. When I showed up at the restaurant, Marco greeted me with that mischievous grin. "Ready to get your hands dirty?" "Born ready." I joked, though I wasn't quite sure what I was getting into. The kitchen was a whirlwind, flashing knives, sizzling pans, and orders flying back and forth. Marco took charge, directing me with patience and clarity. At one point, I was prepping a complicated sauce when he came up behind me, just like he always seemed to do, his presence grounding me amid the chaos. "Almost got it," he whispered, guiding my hand gently over the whisk. "Just a little more wrist." I smiled, heart racing not just from the adrenaline but from the closeness. The dinner was a success. People raved about the food, complimented the ambiance, and even asked about us as a team. Standing beside Marco, watching him shine, I felt this swell of pride. It wasn't just about the cooking anymore. It was about what we were creating together. After everything calmed down, we slipped out the back door and onto the quiet street. The night air was cool, crisp against our skin. Marco took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm glad you're here," he said, voice low. "Me too," I replied. We leaned into each other, the city fading away until there was just us. Two people trying, stumbling, and somehow finding something real. As weeks turned into months, our relationship deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. There were mornings when I woke up to the smell of coffee and fresh bread, to Marco humming softly in the kitchen. There were afternoons spent wandering through farmers, markets, tasting new flavors, planning menus, dreaming big. But there were also challenges. Running a pop-up wasn't easy. We argued about details, stressed over finances, and faced moments where the weight of uncertainty threatened to pull us apart. Yet, every time tension rose, we found our way back, usually over a shared meal and a quiet conversation. One evening, after a particularly long day, we found ourselves sitting on the rooftop of Marco's apartment building, watching the city lights flicker below. "I never thought I'd be here," I admitted, leaning against him. "Here being?" "Here, with you, doing this, feeling this way." He wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. "Neither did I, but I'm glad we did." I smiled, feeling the steady beat of his heart against mine. "Me too." That night, under the stars and the hum of the city, I realized that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places. A knife skills workshop, a chance encounter, a shared passion. And sometimes, those things lead you to exactly where you're meant to be. The pop-up had become more than just a side project. It was our little world. Every Friday night, we transformed a tiny space into a kitchen filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the quiet hum of people enjoying what we created together. It wasn't fancy or perfect, but it was ours. One evening, after we'd closed up and cleaned the counters, Marco and I sat on the floor of the empty kitchen, legs stretched out, still buzzing from the night. He looked over at me, his eyes soft and steady. "You know," he said, "I never imagined that a random cooking class would lead me here, with you." I smiled, feeling the weight of everything. The nerves, the late nights, The moments of doubt that had somehow turned into this. Neither did I admitted, but I'm grateful for it, for you. He reached out, taking my hand in his, fingers intertwining naturally. I think we make a pretty good team. We do, I agreed. There was a quiet pause, the kind that feels full instead of empty. No pressure, no expectations, just two people who'd found something real in the middle of chopping boards and simmering pots. As we sat there, the noise of the world outside dimmed, replaced by the steady rhythm of our breathing and the comfort of shared space. I thought back to that first workshop, the awkward grip on the knife, the unexpected closeness, the way a simple touch had set everything in motion. It was funny how something as ordinary as learning to chop vegetables had led me to this, to someone who saw me, who challenged me, who made me feel like I belonged. Later, when we finally stood to leave, Marco pulled me close one last time, his forehead resting lightly against mine. Whatever comes next, he said, voice quiet but sure, I want to face it with you. I nodded, heart full, knowing that whatever the future, and maybe that was the real recipe for something lasting, not just cooking skills or chance meetings, but the courage to be vulnerable, the patience to grow, and the willingness to take a chance on something unexpected. Walking out into the cool night, hand in hand, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. Not the flashy kind or the dramatic kind, but the steady, warm kind. The kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be.